Hello, Giants fans. Welcome to Giants Baseball 101. I'm Gabe Vaughn, your host. We're getting deeper into the offseason. Teams are already very seriously brainstorming and narrowing down for themselves their pool of free agent candidates, and it's developing basically who there's going to be competition over and more. And the Giants, they have their list of players that they want to go after, and that is essentially what they did last year too. But obviously, it's got to have a different ending, and right now we just hope that they really are serious about the fact that it's just got to go better this time. And we've been talking a lot about where the Giants can upgrade and who they can sign. And I think, though, that today we need to zoom in on a particular issue, and it's in regard to the signing of position players. Obviously, it's already been established that pitching's going to have to be upgraded. I think whatever you think about that, whether you think that Giants pitching has done a terrible job compared to what they should have done, or whether you think it was primarily, whether you think a lot of it was the Giants' defense not living up to what their expectations were, despite bringing in some new rookie players and trying out some new things, it still overall didn't really live up to their reasonable expectations. But I think whatever you think about all of that, it really should be non-disputable that the pitching needs to be upgraded. I just think after what we've seen with the rotation last year and the way the bullpen was being used, it should still stand as a non-disputable fact that the pitching needs to be upgraded with superstar pitchers. But I really today I wanted to focus on position players, because that's where I think some of the confusion might come in if a certain point isn't really looked at for what it is, even if it might not seem super attractive. And I'm going to explain what I'm talking about. And this next point I'm going to make, I've got to be very careful how I go about doing it, because it might at first glance not seem super applicable to the Giants situation. And maybe for some, just depending on how your overall persuasion about baseball goes, for some it might even seem to be just flat out nonsense and completely contradictory to what the Giants need to do and think about. But we're gonna look at some things to support it. We're just gonna look at the overall evidence. We're gonna look at recent history, and we're gonna look at overall what has to happen in order for the Giants to get into October. And this includes a look at the history of 2021, when they did that overwhelmingly, for sure. In all of this emphasis by the Giants on the necessity of improving defense, and in all of the legitimate just observations of how bad that's been, and part of that reason being the fact that the Giants are can kind of be an old team, and maybe some guys are past their prime, at least with that kind of athleticism. All of those conversations are really good to have. And I understand that defensive range, it maybe over the past couple of years was too limited for the Giants, and in a lot of ways. And obviously they should be playing those balls, and maybe that was one of the reasons why the pitchers couldn't get outs when the Giants needed them to. I mean, we're We're looking at that for what it is, for sure. But what I'm going to say tonight is something that, even if it might not sound like it should be popular at the beginning, I think it just really applies, and it could be a way of just getting back to traditional baseball here. With all of the talk about the Giants defense and how far from perfect it is, in terms of signing position players, the overall rule has to be that offense comes as the first priority. I'm not saying that you sacrifice a high number of points of extra defensive outs above average for a few points of batting average or on base percentage or whatever. I'm not saying that at all. And please do not get me wrong. And that may actually come into place when we talk about the third base position. It might come into play there, but you can save outs above average, and if that number's a lot higher, does it take priority? Of course it does. I'm not saying we sacrifice a lot for a little, so please, nobody take me to an extreme here. I'm saying when you've just got these things to think about in general, is it offense, is it impact, hitting, or defense? The point I have to make is that offense has to be the first priority. It has to, because if they can't score runs, let's start by just looking kind of at the history. I understand there's a defense thing there, but do you kind of see some kind of correlation to not landing a superstar hitter? I mean, I'm just saying, you think about, say the Giants had landed Aaron Judge last year. I mean, if he could have added just that extra power for them, how much more could that have done? That's just the simple place we're going to start. And it is, from a historical perspective, and I mean a recent one, it is worth noting that even though the Giants have focused on improving their defense, I think the shortest observation is that it has not worked to get them into the postseason when they just kept it so limited. And a lot of this too has been this whole emphasis on platooning and using kind of creative strategies to try to squeeze out as much as possible, rather than just kind of sticking to some traditional baseball, which that was the way with pitching, like I already mentioned, and I mean with hitting, position playing as well. And I think this departure from traditional baseball has cost the Giants points already established that they need a superstar. And I'm just going to be very specific today and say they need guys who can produce with the bat. And it's just, if you don't take me for what I really mean here, I mean it would be just super easy to act like I'm saying defense wasn't important, which, I mean, please don't, because that's not what I'm saying at all. But here are some points that just don't take them out of context and don't take them out of their current application. You realize that on the baseball field, the overall talent distribution of defense is just, if we're being fair, we have to say it's a lot narrower than the overall talent distribution on offense. What does this mean? Well, in the most practical and simple terms, the routine fielding plays, a lot of those routine plays are almost as likely to be made by the defenders on the lower end of the spectrum as the best defenders in the game. You got to think, and this is one reason why it just seems like that that whole fielding independent pitching thing for a pitcher, even though I understand the flaw with ERA. This is why I think that new statistic seems to go to the other extreme. I mean, on routine fielding plays, it's just kind of it should be straightforward. It's just, maybe this is an extreme example, but that is exactly why Fangraphs updated their formula for fielding independent pitching based on infield pop-ups, which are, except for a few extreme cases, they're almost certain to be caught. Because they see them as such routine plays, the worst fielders in the game are just about as likely to make those plays as are the best fielders in the game. Now that's just one example, pop-ups, and obviously ground balls have a little bit more uncertainty to them and questions about what's going to happen. Same thing with fly balls. But you still got to think of how many of those things are in fact routine. I'm just, don't get mad at me if I'm talking about making plays in a way that I'm not downplaying it at all. I just think tonight that we need to look at things from kind of an overall perspective in order to make sense, head or tail, out of this. And it's something we just have to realize that there's kind of a routineness to fielding that maybe doesn't exist with hitting. And that's why it has to be such a priority to grab the best hitters, because I feel like that is a kind of competitive advantage that exists in a greater degree because of what the talent distribution actually looks like. And they're probably they are harder to come by in baseball, which is why I believe it's the competitive advantage there. It's just a way for the Giants to stick to baseball traditionalism here, for the Giants, it's kind of getting back to it a bit, or at least moving in that direction. It's a hard thing to say at a time when so much is being said about the Giants' poor defense and how it's got to improve, but I'm just saying, overall, in the overall picture, I don't believe that's going to change, and the top is the top. Now, what does this mean in terms of players the Giants might sign? Well, I mean, there's this article that came out, and I forget how recently it came out, but it's basically the eight guys that the Giants might be targeting in free agency, and obviously that would not be an exhaustive list, but it seems to contain some pretty big names, and that's something that I do want to kind of go over. Not going to go over in its entirety, but try to see how this applies to the situation. Now, I think the first thing I should mention here then is center field, because that's an area where obviously defense, if you can, the ideal guy would be someone who can play perfect defense and hit super well too. But how often that actually exists in baseball is a thing that we have to work with limited resources here. And I did want to talk about it. There are good options and there are bad options at center field. And how the Giants do is going to depend on how they think and what they're willing to put in financially. The guys that could play center field for the Giants that they're actually on the top of the list are Cody Bellinger and the Korean star Jung-Hoo Lee. Those are the guys that the Giants, if they want to win next year, those are the guys the Giants have to target and have to make an absolute priority to get one of for center field, Cody Bellinger or Jung-Hoo Lee. Don't worry about Cody Bellinger having a couple of bad seasons before this one. Do you realize how young he is? He just, and it should have been an already known fact that he'd pick up again. I'm like, I'm willing to take his 2023 stats in isolation because I believe that's how he's going to perform in 2024. Unfortunately, I don't have time today to just go through all of the evidence to back it up, but I'm only saying I think 2023 is a very good predictor of how he'll do in 2024, and he's got his history that of his first few years in the big leagues to back that up. He's a great option, and Jung-Hoo Lee obviously too, great player. Could be a fit in center field. Both of these guys could play center field well. Now, the question is, could they play it as well as Kevin Kiermaier and Harrison Bader, another couple of free agents? I mean, Kiermaier and Bader have these. I mean, they've won Gold Gloves. I think both of them at that position, and I mean, I don't really know everybody's defensive skills, but it is possible that maybe there is something there that maybe if you're talking about star defenders, it would be guys more along the lines of Kiermaier and Bader, although I'm not entirely sure. But here's the practical application of what I'm talking about. I mean, Kevin Kiermaier was an average hitter in 2023. He was close to basically the league average performance. Bader, on the other hand, he was terrible and he struggled with an injury. So Bader is not, he's just, I'm going to be straightforward and say he's not a good option to sign, and he's just not. And Kiermaier too is he a terrible option? Well, I mean, no, given his quality defense in center field and the fact that he can at least perform average with the bat. When there are other guys that should be ahead of him, though, then yes, it would be terrible to drop to having to just grab Kiermaier when first, you know, it's just if you didn't get either Bellinger or Jung-Hoo Lee or at least someone else at a different position, then that is a problem. Now, I can't say, I will say, I can't say what position that the superstar the Giants have to land is going to be. And I'm talking about they have to land a superstar in addition to pitching. I hope that fact's been established. I don't know what position he would play exactly, but it seems like since these center fielders are on the list of guys the Giants are targeting, I think center fielder, and they talked about it being a priority too. So both Bellinger and Jung-Hoo Lee, they can play center field. I mean, I think they can play it, I mean, probably above average. And they're the guys who can hit, and we know that they can hit. And that's at center field, those are the guys the Giants have to go after. And I mean, really go after, like put their budget into it, and there's just not going to be any excuse for not doing it, period. Now, are the Giants going wrong there? Not yet, because what I did read in that article, what I did read was that, or at least what essentially sounded like the fact that it is still their priority to go after Bellinger and Kiermaier Bellinger and Jung-Hoo Lee in center field as top priorities. That's what I read, and it's my understanding. Only thing that makes me skeptical is that the Giants have said things that sound like this before too and not followed through on them. So as far as what the Giants' perspective is, I think it's right now. I mean, they've talked about getting better defensively, which that's a great thing. That's definitely a great thing to talk about. I just as long as the focus on it doesn't distract from having to get impact quality bats, which in terms of hitting ability, I will just say that Jung-Hoo Lee seems to be a guy who can make contact, which I think that ability in today's game of baseball, it's being lost. I mean, guys can hit home runs, but I mean, there's something about the ability to just make contact that might be being lost, just at least compared to what it was before. So it might be a competitive advantage to be able to bring guys into the game who can maybe get on base better or even be exceptional. Like, I don't know what to make exactly of Jung-Hoo Lee's Korean Baseball Organization stats so far, but if he could be some kind of exceptional, like better than almost anybody else in the game at getting on base, we're going to have to see what that does exactly for the Giants. Now, Also, in terms of who they're signing and placing the priority on offense, this does. I hate to say this when Bob Melvin has just become the manager, but I'm gonna say it's got to be said. This applies to Matt Chapman too. He was about an average hitter in 2023. He can play stellar defense. Now, am I saying not to sign Matt Chapman? No, absolutely not. I'm just saying he doesn't get in the way of a superstar bat at really any position. Even, I think, honestly, like maybe a full-time DH, although I will say a full-time DH would have to be really, really good. And I don't have time tonight to check on everybody's statistics like in that regard. But even Matt Chapman is subject to the whole priority list for the Giants. Now, I will just say, though, as far as third baseman, if you're looking at it by position, I don't really see a guy that stands out as the best guy to get. So it's just as long as the budget's still available and flexible for other things, there's nothing wrong with making and extending an offer to a guy like Matt Chapman. Thank you for watching. This has been Giants Baseball 101. Please subscribe if you haven't. Also, please leave your questions and comments. You know where to do it. I'll see you next time on Giants Baseball 101.